So here's a question for you. Are you mentally ill if you refuse to get the vaccine? Well, the biopharmaceutical complex, working in lockstep with Western governments, appears ready to prescribe medication, psychiatric medication, to people that might refuse to get the vaccine. I know this sounds absolutely crazy. Let's start with Canada. During an interview at the Let Freedom Reign tour, bunch of good interviews that came out of this tour, by the way, physician and cancer researcher Dr. William Mackis, who's been sounding the alarm over mandatory vaccines, and he's particularly been sounding the alarm over what's been happening to doctors in his field after they've undergone mandatory jabs. Look him up. I'm not going to go into his details here, but he claimed that the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario sent out a note to doctors implying that their unvaccinated patients may be suffering from a mental illness and should be prescribed psychiatric medicine. So listen to this. Watch.
I mean, there is a definite assault against the unvaccinated, and you've talked about how even they recommend, perhaps psychiatric medication or something for people that don't want to take a vaccine.
So this has come out recently out of the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. The college sent out a letter or a memo to all the doctors in Ontario suggesting to them, now so far they're not mandating it, they're just suggesting it, that any of their unvaccinated patients, that they should consider that they have a mental problem and that they should be put on psychiatric medication. So far, it's just a suggestion, but the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario should not be making these kinds of suggestions. This is extremely unethical, and this is a very, very slippery slope. If they're suggesting that people who wish to have bodily autonomy and don't want an experimental vaccine, that there may be something mentally wrong with them, that is a very, very dangerous, slippery slope that we're on.
It's unbelievable. Do you think?
It's believable. I finished a book this year called Crazy Like Us, The Globalization of the American Psyche, by a psychiatrist or psychologist named Ethan Waters. And what he did was he went around the globe and he studied different countries that had these events that the West came in with psychologists and psychiatrists to say, oh, well, here's some Paxil or whatever, Zoloft or what have you. And the West basically created mental health disorders in places like Asia that they didn't exist before through social contagion. For instance, in Sri Lanka, after the big tsunami, Sri Lanka has like a cultural way to deal with these kinds of tragedies, but all manner of psychologists and psychiatrists flooded this nation and came there and said, we're here to help with you process the trauma. You have the trauma, you all have trauma, and started to flood this population with pharmaceuticals with no government regulation, no standardization, and no collaboration. They just went in and started giving these people pills, and they were fighting over who they would treat. They went to Japan and started to talk to other doctors about how to drum up support for treating girls for eating disorders and body dysmorphia or dysphoria. And they sort of wrote the book around how we create this and how we pass, and the Japanese government said, you can't sell this here without trials on Japanese people. And the pharmaceutical companies were like, that's ridiculous. We have trials. We had trials in America, but they went through the FDA. And the Japanese government, they hired celebrities basically to say, like, I took this because I was sad. There's so many instances, I can't recommend this book enough, called Crazy Like Us, of the way that the pharmaceutical companies will come and find an in and say, and we see it now with the pandemic, not so much around, yes, this is concerning that it has to do with the COVID vaccine, but we do see now every time the newspaper says that there is a higher incidence of depression, specifically in children, that has a suggestive effect. And psychiatrists and psychologists know this. They have always known this, that when they name a disorder, they get more of it. That's just it. That's not to say that people are not actually suffering from something or to delegitimize, but there is a social contagion. When Princess Diana came out and said that she had bulimia, the incidence of self-proclaimed bulimia skyrocketed. So these things absolutely have a social contagion. And when they talk about it in the media, they come with a drug. And so I'm really, after reading this book, I'm really wary of anytime I see something in the media saying people are more depressed, people can't sleep, kids are more depressed, because that usually opens the way for pharmaceuticals as the solution.
Well, Hagbard in our chat says, my wife, an Ontario general practitioner, is calling BS on this. Well, she can call BS on it all she likes, but here's the memo. Let's show you the actual memo that was sent out. Maybe she didn't receive it, but here it is, and we'll take a closer look. So that's the actual memo. So what I want to zero in on, of course, is the last paragraph down here. So let's zoom in on that. And the next slide, which says, it's also important that physicians work with their patients to manage anxieties related to the vaccine and not enable avoidance behavior. For example, for extreme fear of needles or other cases of concern, responsible use of prescription medications and or referral to psychotherapy may be available options. Overall, physicians have a responsibility to allow their patients to be properly informed about vaccines and not have those anxieties empowered by an exemption.
Not enable avoidance behavior. That's the part that makes me want to punch someone in the nose.
Yeah, so sorry, Hagbard, calling BS on that. But hey, it's very important to be skeptical, right? This is, again, but we're showing you the actual memo. We reached out, I'll get to that in a second. We reached out to the Ontario, the College of Physicians and Surgeons at Ontario, Redacted did. We reached out to them for comment. We did not get a response. So did the Gateway Pundit. Also reached out to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, to their media department. They have not responded for this. So if you don't want this experimental drug, you must have mental problems. Don't give them a medical exemption. Don't give them a medical exemption. I love that in that paragraph. Don't give them a medical exemption.
Well, I'm curious about avoidance behavior because, again, we've talked about if someone has recently had COVID, that's a valid reason to avoid further vaccination. So what are we calling avoidance behavior? And then what do we empower then the government to do as a response?
Yeah, exactly. And Black Dog says being skeptical is being intelligent. We absolutely should. And so we want to look at all of these stories through the lens of skepticism, right? And especially when you have, as Natalie just pointed out, all of these mainstream media, newspaper publications are coming out saying, all these people are depressed. All of these people have this issue. All of these people have this. Really? And then, well, what's the solution? Oh, let's get Big Pharma in there. Let's get the biopharmaceutical. I was watching the NFL yesterday. I was watching a game, and I was like, what is this ad for COVID? Why is there an ad for COVID in the middle of an NFL? I was watching the Eagles game, and suddenly, it was for Pfizer. Of course. Do you have COVID? Do you know someone? It can come on slow. It can affect people in different ways, says Pfizer. And, well, you should after you get COVID, you should probably over the air come to us at Pfizer and grab this, whatever it was, the post getting it thing where you drink it, or I don't know, what's the Paxlovid?
Something like, no, I think Paxlovid is, I don't know.
Yeah. And so, it's very, very difficult to find. You're getting your hands on this memo, very, very difficult. So again, we're waiting for a response. I would love to hear a response from them on what exactly they meant by giving people psychiatric medicines, prescriptions, or referrals to psychotherapy may be available options if they have anxieties or express serious concerns about getting a vaccine. It's exactly what they say.
And they're looking for disorders to treat. For instance, this author that I mentioned, he thinks that PTSD had its big heyday in the last 30 years where people self-describe themselves as survivors of trauma. Not that they're not survivors of trauma, but PTSD originally was called Vietnam syndrome, and it was a specific syndrome that soldiers returning from Vietnam had for very specific reasons. It was never supposed to be applied to people who were not in Vietnam. Trauma is a real thing, but not this disorder.
This specific
and
thing.
Because it became such a popular thing, and psychiatrists realized that they could use this to describe certain feelings and then use it for prescriptions, that it sort of took on a life of its own. This author thinks that the next big thing we'll see will be called post-traumatic embitterment disorder, where you feel lasting embitterment over some kind of loss of a job or traumatic event or loss of a friendship or a spouse, and you can't get over it. And they are actively working to look for medication that will go with this post-traumatic embitterment disorder. So again, these things, and the media takes no responsibility for, once it covers this as a syndrome, knowing that the pharmaceuticals will swoop right up and sell you something to go with it.
Well, a lot of Canadians following this story have been quick to point out the recent changes to the law. How many of you are watching right now are from Canada? From Canada? Drop us a comment below and let us know that there's, of course, recent changes to your laws in Canada, where the government is moving forward with plans to allow euthanizing mentally ill patients. Mentally ill patients can, of course, send a request to be euthanized. They can ask for it. Right? They don't even need the family to be involved. They can ask for it to be euthanized, even without family's consent. And boom, they'll take care of it. Just like the Canadian Alan Nichols, as the Associated Press reports. This is an Associated Press report. Disturbing, it says. Experts troubled by Canada's euthanasia laws. Alan Nichols, that's who you're seeing there on your screen, had a history of depression and other medical issues, but none were life-threatening. Nichols submitted a request to be euthanized, and yes, he was killed, despite concerns raised by his family and a nurse practitioner. What did he put on his application? Hearing loss. Yeah, hearing loss. And they ended his life.
You know that, I mean, and they said that Dr. Kevorkian was unethical.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, at least he did it with, like, he cared about the people.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Oh, you're just fine. You hearing loss? Yeah, we'll take care of it. We'll take care of it. Canada has the most expansive euthanasia laws, and they are expanding them in March. Because a number of Canadian, Canadian viewers were pointing this out, that they're expanding this in March. So it's going to get more expansive in 2023, including mental illness now, and removing the 10-day waiting period before making it happen. As of March 2023, mental illness will be included in the criteria for assessing medical assistance in death. It says, according to Rebel News, it can be accessed by people who choose natural death, whose natural death is not the foreseeable future. You simply must be in a state of decline that cannot be reversed in ways that you find acceptable. Fatality or terminality of a condition is not a requirement.
In ways you find acceptable, okay.
Physician-assisted suicide has received a bit of a rebranding in Canada. Because it sounds so harsh. So we're going to kind of remove that branding, and we're going to come up with a new name called MAID, M-A-I-D, which is medical assistance in dying. Oh, did you call the MAID? Like, it sounds so sweet. Oh, you on the MAID list? You going to get the MAID to come over? Here's an example. Madeline can't afford, and it's not, I mean, it's just a lot of people. Madeline can't afford to live with her illness. She may choose to die instead. So it's the pricing. Because it's so expensive, you can go on the MAID list.
Boy, that's a real...
Wait, I thought they had health care.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's a real testament to their healthcare system.
Yeah. For the past 20 years, the 54-year-old Vancouver woman has amassed $40,000 in debts trying to treat a disorder and other ailments. When her money runs out, she says medically assisted death may be her only option.
Was she having to come to the United States for some kind of treatment or something? Because again, like, I thought everything was covered in their medical system.
Can all people in debt choose to die instead of?
Yeah, that's part of the plan. So if you just want to end it because you're in debt, that's the way it goes. Here's another example.
You don't have to find a bus.
Well, credit card companies.
You can get a doctor.
Credit card companies are going to be on college campuses now. They're going to be like, hey, go out and get these credit cards. If you can't pay back your debt, we've got a solution for you.
Here's Alex C., and I love this website, Dying with Dignity Canada, provides us with this story. Alex C.'s story, my medical journey and struggle to access MAID. She was going to get on MAID. What motivates a person to consider medical assistance in dying? At what point did they say, I've had enough? It's just too hard I can't do this anymore. Making the decision to request MAID is not something that happens overnight. A person doesn't wake up one morning and say, I want to exercise my legal right to death. But, if I've got gut-wrenching mental anguish, or I've got other types of pain, or some sort of credit card debt, this is an opportunity. This is Canada right now.
Okay.
This is Canada. But it's not just in Canada. And a lot of our viewers here in our chat right now are pointing out, a lot of our Canadian viewers are pointing out the number of doctors that have just dropped dead in Canada. It's been bad. I mean, they're zeroing in on like 100, I think. I think the number right now is at 93, which is really, really troubling. Anyway, in Switzerland, Swiss cardiologist Dr. Thomas Binder describes his experience in a mental health facility. When he was placed there for speaking the truth about COVID-19. As a condition of his release.
Yes, they could not arrest me because I did nothing wrong. They realized this after 1 hour. There was no threat of anybody. And I was not armed, and I had no psychiatric history, of course. All these allegations of this labeler were wrong. And so they couldn't arrest me. So obviously they tried something else, and they didn't know how to deal with me. So they put me into closed psychiatry. But then they gave me the opportunity to decide. Either you stay here in the psychiatric hospital for 6 weeks to have treated this mania, or you can leave and go home and continue to work, but you must take a medication. And I was forced to take a neuroleptic, and whether I took it or not was weekly controlled by a blood check.
What?
So these are really Soviet-style, GDR-style psychiatric methods.
This is outrageous. So this is Switzerland. For everybody listening right now, I want you to all know that this is happening in Switzerland, and you were forced to take a psychiatric medication because you spoke out against COVID-19 restrictions and measures. Am I right?
Yes, but of course these, as I said, the Corona insane other side decided I must be Corona insane. So from their point of view, this was of course correct. But from my point of view, this was completely wrong. Yeah, this was it.
I heard a word this week from Vivek Ramaswamy. He says covetism is this new belief that the government was right. We all should have taken our vaccines. No complaining about masks, no complaining about lockdowns. What we did was right. What we went through was justified, and it's still not over. That's covetism. And I don't even have to explain it to you for you to know if I just say, like, the left is obsessed with covetism.
Right.
Yes. Liberals should not be, because it's so anti-liberal, but the left and the liberal camps are so, like, intertwined these days, you can't see the difference.
Right.
So...
Right,
this is covetism to the extreme.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And, we're going to hear more stories like this coming out because you're going to start to hear this. I'm sure you're going to start to hear some of this as it relates to like the military. Anyway, we're going to hear more stories like this. So it's amazing. And if you have any stories like this, please share them with us. If you've been told that you are crazy or that you have to take some sort of medication because of your anxiety. But it's a beautiful
new market for them, right? This like anti-covidism. Then you need here pill. And I would like to clarify for anyone who thought that I was saying PTSD is not real. Of course it is. People's trauma is real. But to go to some place like Sri Lanka and say, you just experienced this, you're going to have trauma, here's some medication, when they have cultural structures in place to deal with tragedy and always have had in these small villages. They never needed medication before.
They don't need Pfizer popping in there.
So for us to say, this is what you have is PTSD, we have a whole book about it, right? When PTSD was supposed to be unique to Vietnam survivors, and it morphed. So if you are someone or someone in your family feels like you're suffering from it, I am not telling you you're not. I am saying your trauma is real, but you have to look at the history of this illness to see that the pharmaceutical companies were chomping at the bit to expand it, and the media takes no responsibility in telling people what their neuroses are, because knowing that there's a pharmaceutical company waiting in the wings.
Right, because they're all paid by these pharmaceutical companies. You know, every one of their news segments is brought to you by Pfizer, Moderna, et cetera, et cetera. So of course they're not going to tell you the truth on that.